Dr. Anna Volkova had always considered herself a rational person. 37 years of life, 12 of which were dedicated to psychiatry, had taught her not to believe in the supernatural. Every morning she woke up in her one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city, brewed strong coffee in an old Turkish coffee pot inherited from her grandmother, and prepared for another day at the municipal psychiatric hospital. Her apartment was modest but cozy, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with medical journals and classical literature, an old leather sofa bought at a second-hand shop, and a small desk by the window where she wrote scientific articles in the evenings. The walls were adorned with her diplomas and several black-and-white photographs, portraits of patients she had cured over years of practice. Work at the hospital was not easy for her. Each day brought new cases, each requiring an individual approach. Patients arrived with various diagnoses, from mild depressive disorders to severe forms of schizophrenia. Anna tried to find an approach to everyone, spending long hours in therapeutic sessions, studying medical histories and consulting with colleagues. Her office on the third floor of the old hospital building was decorated in calm tones. Beige walls, soft armchairs, a small table with tissues for those who couldn't hold back tears during sessions. On the windowsill stood pots of violets, which she regularly watered, believing that live plants created a more trusting atmosphere. For the past few months, a strange pattern among patients had caught her attention. People were admitted to the hospital with similar symptoms: complete emotional emptiness, apathy, a lack of reaction to any stimuli. They showed neither joy nor sorrow nor fear, as if their inner world had been completely drained. Medical examinations revealed no physical causes for this condition. Blood tests, brain scans, neurological tests, everything was normal. But patients continued to arrive, and their number grew each week. The first was Mikhail Petrov, a 40-year-old engineer who worked at a local factory. His wife brought him to the hospital after he had sat at home for a week, unresponsive to anything around him. Mikhail didn't eat, sleep, or speak. He just sat in an armchair and stared into space. When Anna tried to converse with him, he answered monosyllabically without any emotional inflection. His eyes were empty, as if their inner light had gone out. His wife recounted that Mikhail had experienced severe work-related stress the day before this state. There had been an accident, and he had almost died. But even traumatic experiences usually didn't lead to such complete emotional devastation. Next was Ekaterina Smirnova, a 25-year-old elementary school teacher. Her parents brought her in, concerned that their daughter had stopped leaving her room and communicating with others. Ekaterina, always lively and emotional, had turned into an indifferent shadow of herself. She mechanically performed the simplest actions: ate when food was served, went to the toilet, showered, but did so without any engagement, like a robot. Her parents said they had last seen her normal a week ago, when she spoke of a strange dream that had greatly frightened her. But Ekaterina didn't remember the details of the dream, or didn't want to recount them. Anna began keeping detailed statistics of such cases. Entries in her notebook grew daily: names, ages, circumstances preceding the illness. She noticed that most patients mentioned intense fear they had experienced shortly before the onset of apathy. Some spoke of nightmares, others of panic attacks, still others of a sudden feeling of terror for no apparent reason. But after this peak of fear came complete emotional emptiness, as if something had sucked out all their capacity to feel. Anna's colleagues were skeptical of her theory. The head of the department, Professor Nikitin, an elderly man with a gray beard and tired eyes, believed she was simply overtired and seeing patterns where none existed. He suggested she take a vacation, rest, and switch to other matters. But Anna couldn't leave this enigma unsolved. Each new case strengthened her conviction that something unusual was happening, something beyond the scope of traditional psychiatry. At home, she spent evenings studying specialized literature. She flipped through old medical journals, searched for descriptions of similar cases, and read works by colleagues from other countries. Her apartment gradually transformed into a research laboratory. Articles, interview transcripts with patients, diagrams, and charts she compiled, all trying to find common patterns, lay scattered on her desk. Her coffee grew cold in her cup as she delved into another scientific paper, hoping to find the key to the puzzle. Sleep came to her less and less often. Anna lay in bed, but thoughts of her patients wouldn't let her rest. She recalled their empty eyes, mechanical movements, complete lack of emotional reaction. What could have such an effect on the human psyche? What force was capable of completely stripping a person of the ability to feel? These questions haunted her, making her toss and turn in bed until morning. Gradually, Anna began to notice that she herself was changing. Working with such patients took its toll. She became more irritable, often lost her appetite, and felt constant fatigue. Sometimes it seemed to her that someone was watching her, in the hospital corridors, on the street, even at home. She would turn around but see no one. Perhaps it was paranoia caused by overwork, but the feeling of an alien presence grew stronger. One evening, while going through another patient's medical history, Anna stumbled upon an entry that made her freeze. The patient described his state before the onset of apathy. He felt an invisible presence nearby, feeding on his fear, draining him of his vital forces. It sounded like a delusion, but too many patients spoke of something similar. Perhaps their stories contained a grain of truth. The following weeks brought Anna new revelations that forced her to reconsider her views on the nature of what was happening. The number of patients with the emotional desolation syndrome continued to grow, and each new case added a piece to the puzzle of the mysterious phenomenon. She began conducting deeper interviews, recording every word on a voice recorder, analyzing not only the content but also the intonations, pauses, and nonverbal reactions. She was particularly interested in the case of Sergei Orlov, a 33-year-old programmer who was admitted to the hospital after being found semi-conscious in his apartment. Sergei lived alone in a 2-room apartment on the 7th floor of a panel building, worked remotely for a foreign company, and rarely left home. His lifestyle was measured and predictable. Waking up at 9 in the morning, coffee, working on his computer until evening, dinner in front of the TV, sleep. No stress, no conflicts, no apparent reasons for a mental disorder. Neighbors noticed something strange when they stopped hearing sounds from his apartment. Usually Sergei worked late, and the lights in his windows stayed on until 2 or 3 in the morning. But for a week, his windows had remained dark, and there was no answer to knocks on the door. The management company opened the lock and found Sergei sitting in an armchair in front of a turned-off computer. He was alive but completely unresponsive to what was happening. The apartment was in perfect order. There was enough food in the refrigerator for several days, but Sergei just sat and stared into space. During the first therapy session, Sergei told Anna about the events preceding his condition. A few days before he was found, he was working on a complex project that required complete concentration. The deadline was approaching, and he felt increasing tension. At night, when he was especially engrossed in the code, strange things began to happen in the apartment. At first, he blamed it on fatigue. He imagined someone standing behind him, though he was alone. Then he started hearing sounds, a quiet whisper, floorboards creaking, even though no one was in the apartment. The culmination came one night when the fear reached its peak. Sergei felt that someone was in the room. The presence was so real that he could almost physically feel an alien breath on his neck. Turning around, he saw no one, but the sensation didn't disappear. On the contrary, it intensified. Cold sweat covered his body. His heart beat so fast he feared losing consciousness. And suddenly all that terror just vanished, as if someone had flipped a switch. But along with the fear, everything else disappeared: joy, sorrow, curiosity, desires. Sergei turned into an empty shell, devoid of all emotions. Anna recorded every word, trying not to miss a single detail. Sergei's story remarkably resembled those of other patients but was more detailed. She asked clarifying questions, trying to understand the mechanism of what was happening. What exactly did Sergei feel at the peak of fear? Was the sensation physical or psychological? Did he remember the moment the fear disappeared? Sergei answered mechanically, without emotions, but his descriptions were precise and detailed. He spoke of how the cold spread through his body, how the air in the room became thicker, how sounds acquired a particular sharpness. And then, sudden silence, emptiness, as if the whole world had lost its colors. He remembered trying to get up from the armchair but couldn't find the motivation to do so. Food, sleep, work, everything lost meaning. There was only a gray, unemotional existence. Studying the records, Anna noticed recurring elements in the patient's accounts. All of them described the moment of peak fear as an encounter with something invisible but very real. Many mentioned sudden cold, a change in the atmosphere of the room, a sensation of an alien presence, and then a sharp transition from extreme terror to complete emotional vacuum. It was as if something fed on their fear and, once satiated, left behind only an empty shell. Anna began searching for information about similar phenomena in various sources. She studied the works of parapsychologists, ethnographers, and historians, trying to find mentions of beings or phenomena that could explain what was happening. In old books, she found descriptions of demons and spirits that fed on human emotions, but this seemed too fantastical for scientific research. However, the deeper she delved into the subject, the more evidence she found that similar phenomena had occurred in different cultures and eras. Slavic mythology contained mentions of spirits that drained people's life force. Eastern traditions spoke of entities that fed on negative emotions. Even in modern ufology, there were descriptions of contact with beings that affected the human psyche, leaving individuals in a state of apathy. Anna knew her colleagues would never believe such theories. The scientific community demanded proof, facts, measurable data. But how could one measure what was invisible? How could one prove the existence of something that only manifested in moments of extreme fear? She felt trapped, torn between scientific methodology and growing suspicions about the supernatural nature of what was happening. Her own condition also began to cause concern. Constant interaction with emotionally empty patients, analysis of their stories, attempts to understand the nature of the mysterious phenomenon, all of this affected her psyche. Anna began to notice that her emotional response to ordinary events had dulled. The joy of successfully treating other patients became less vivid, the sorrow of failures less acute. She attributed it to professional burnout, but an inner voice suggested the cause might be deeper. At home, she increasingly caught herself listening to sounds in the apartment. The creak of floorboards, the sound of water in the pipes, the hum of the elevator, all of it took on special significance. Sometimes she felt as if someone was standing behind the door, but when she opened it, the hallway was empty. Perhaps it was paranoia caused by overwork, but the feeling of an alien presence became more persistent. This feeling was especially strong at night. Anna lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay with open eyes, staring into the darkness, and it seemed to her that someone was watching her from the corner of the room. Shadows from the furniture took on strange shapes, and every sound made her jump. She turned on the light, but the room was empty. Only in the morning, when the first rays of the sun penetrated through the curtains, did this feeling disappear. Anna began to keep a diary, recording her observations and experiences. She hoped it would help her better understand what was happening and find a way to combat the mysterious phenomenon. Every day she noted new details, analyzed patterns, and built hypotheses. Her entries became more detailed and her theories bolder. One hypothesis, which seemed most probable to her, was that there existed some entity, invisible to most people, that fed on human fear. This entity could be a parasite or a predator, using emotions as a source of energy. When a person experienced peak fear, the entity activated, absorbed that emotion, and in the process of feeding destroyed the victim's ability to feel. The result was complete emotional desolation. But if this were true, how could people be protected from such an influence? How could one fight against something invisible and intangible? Anna understood that traditional treatment methods were powerless here. Antidepressants, psychotherapy, electroconvulsive therapy, all of these worked with known mechanisms of the psyche but could not affect supernatural factors. She decided to try an unconventional approach. Anna began studying practices for protection against evil spirits in various cultures. Amulets, incantations, purification rituals. All of this seemed archaic, but if the problem truly had a supernatural nature, then the solution needed to be sought in corresponding fields. She visited antique shops, searched for old books, and talked to people who practiced folk medicine and magic. Gradually, strange objects appeared in her apartment. Ancient amulets, bundles of dried herbs, stones with symbols engraved on them. Anna wasn't superstitious, but desperation compelled her to try any means of protection. She sprinkled salt in the corners of the room, burned incense, and recited incantations in Old Church Slavonic. All of this seemed ridiculous for someone with a medical degree, but she was willing to do anything to find answers. One night, when the feeling of an alien presence became particularly strong, Anna decided on a desperate step. She sat in her armchair holding an ancient amulet and tried to summon this entity into contact. If it truly fed on fear, then her own terror should attract its attention. She focused on her most frightening memories, intensifying her feelings of anxiety and panic. The temperature in the room began to drop. Anna felt the cold penetrate her skin, making her shiver. The air became thicker, breathing became difficult. And then she saw it, or almost saw it. It wasn't so much a visual image as a sensation of form, of presence, of something dark and hungry that materialized in the corner of the room. The entity was both real and ghostly, visible and invisible, like a mirage in the desert. Anna felt her fear intensify, feeding this entity. She understood that she was on the verge of the same state as her patients. A little more, and she would lose the ability to feel, turning into an empty shell. But instead of fleeing, she continued to observe, committing every detail of this encounter to memory. Science demanded sacrifices, and she was willing to sacrifice herself for the sake of understanding the truth. The creature slowly approached her, and Anna felt reality begin to distort around her. The room's walls seemed to breathe, the furniture shifted its contours, and the air grew thick and viscous like molasses. She clutched the amulet so tightly that its sharp edges dug into her palm, but the pain helped her remain conscious. The entity had no clear form. It was more a cluster of shadows constantly swirling and changing its boundaries. Sometimes outlines of human features flickered within this darkness, but they dissolved instantly like smoke. Suddenly, the contact broke. The creature vanished as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving behind only a sense of emptiness and cold. Anna remained in the armchair, trembling from the horror she had experienced, yet feeling a strange satisfaction. She had seen it. She was right. The creature truly existed, and now she had proof, albeit subjective. She quickly wrote down everything she remembered while the impressions were fresh. Every detail, every sensation could be important for understanding the nature of this phenomenon. The following days passed in a feverish flurry of activity. Anna compiled a detailed report of her observations and decided to present it to her colleagues. She knew she might be deemed insane, but scientific integrity demanded sharing the data she had gathered. At the hospital, she called a meeting, inviting all the doctors from her department and the head. The conference room was filled with skeptical faces who listened incredulously to her account of an invisible entity feeding on human fear. Professor Nikitin was the first to voice his opinion. He spoke softly but firmly, explaining that Anna was likely overtired from working with difficult patients and had begun projecting their delusional ideas onto her own perception of reality. He suggested she take an extended leave, undergo psychotherapy, and return to work only after a full recovery. Other doctors supported his opinion. Some even suggested hospitalizing Anna for observation. Anna tried to object, presenting facts, statistics, and case descriptions, but her colleagues refused to listen. To them, she had transformed from a respected doctor into a patient in need of treatment. It was especially painful to hear the pitying tones in the voices of people she had worked alongside for years. They looked at her as if she were ill, a victim of professional burnout, unable to distinguish reality from hallucinations. But Anna wasn't going to give up. If official medicine wasn't ready to accept her discovery, she would act independently. At home, she set up a makeshift laboratory, installing surveillance cameras and devices to measure temperature and electromagnetic fields. If the creature truly materialized during moments of fear, its appearance should leave some physical traces. She was ready to conduct an experiment on herself, despite the risk to her own psyche. Preparation for the experiment took several days. Anna studied all available materials on methods of inducing intense fear, from psychological techniques to narcotic substances. She settled on a combination of sensory deprivation and subconscious manipulation. In her apartment, she created conditions as close as possible to those described by her patients. Complete darkness, silence, isolation from the outside world. In the evening, as night fell outside, Anna began the experiment. She locked all the doors, disconnected her phone and mobile network, and drew the heavy curtains. Only a faint light from the devices registering various environmental parameters remained in the room. Anna sat in the armchair, closed her eyes, and began to recall the most frightening moments of her life. The death of her parents, failed surgeries, the suffering of patients, all of it surged into her consciousness with painful vividness. Slowly, the fear began to build. Anna felt her heart rate quicken, sweat bead on her forehead, and her breathing become ragged. She didn't resist these sensations. On the contrary, she amplified them, feeding the terror with new frightening images. The room filled with an atmosphere of dread, as if the very air was saturated with fear. And then, she felt the familiar presence. The room's temperature began to drop, and the instruments registered anomalous readings. Anna opened her eyes and saw a dark figure begin to materialize in the corner of the room. This time, she was prepared for the encounter and didn't avert her gaze. The creature was clearer than last time, as if her fear had made it more real. The entity approached slowly, and Anna could discern it in more detail. It wasn't entirely formless. Within the swirling darkness, the outlines of a human figure could be glimpsed, but distorted, malformed. Its arms were too long, its head disproportionately large, and in place of a face there was a gaping void. Most terrifying was the sense of ancientness emanating from the creature, as if it had existed long before humanity. Anna felt her fear reach a critical point, and it was at this moment that the creature began to feed actively. She saw almost invisible threads stretching from her to the entity through which her life energy flowed. It wasn't just fear. It was the very capacity to feel, to experience emotions, to be a living human being. Anna understood that if she allowed the process to complete, she would become as desolate as her patients, but she didn't stop. Scientific interest proved stronger than the instinct for self-preservation. She observed the process, recording every detail, every change in the creature's behavior. The instruments showed sharp fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. The temperature dropped several degrees, and a dark spot appeared on the infrared camera screen where the creature had materialized. Suddenly, something changed. The creature stopped, its form became more indistinct, and the absorption process slowed down. Anna realized that her scientific curiosity was somehow interfering with the entity's feeding. Perhaps pure fear, unmixed with other emotions, was more nourishing for it, while mixed feelings were harder to assimilate. This was an important discovery that could help in developing protective methods. She tried to change the nature of her emotions, focusing on pure terror. and the creature activated again. The absorption process resumed with renewed vigor, and Anna felt her emotional world begin to dim. Joy, sorrow, anger, love, all of it slowly disappeared, leaving behind a gray emptiness. She knew she was minutes away from complete desolation, but she continued to observe, recording data until the last moment. When the process was almost complete, Anna made a final effort of will and activated a pre-prepared mechanism. Bright light filled the room, all electrical appliances turned on, and loud music blared. The abrupt change in sensory conditions disrupted the creature's concentration, and it began to fade. Anna felt her ability to feel return, but this return was incomplete. A part of her emotional world remained forever lost. The analysis of the recorded data took several days. The instruments registered anomalous changes in the electromagnetic field, temperature fluctuations, and infrared anomalies. These were the first objective proofs of the existence of an entity that fed on human fear. Anna compiled a detailed report, supplementing it with graphs, diagrams, and photographs from the instruments. But when she tried to present the results to her colleagues, she was met with even colder reception than before. Professor Nikitin declared that the data could have been fabricated and that Anna herself needed immediate hospitalization. The hospital administration suspended her from work, ordering a compulsory psychiatric examination. For official medicine, she had become not a researcher, but a patient with delusional ideas. Anna understood that her career in traditional medicine was over. But she didn't regret her choice. She had discovered the existence of an entity that had remained in the shadows for centuries, feeding on human fear. Now, her task was to find a way to protect people from this creature and help those who had fallen victim to it. She decided to act independently, opening a private practice in her apartment. Rumors of her unusual treatment methods quickly spread among people desperate for help beyond official medicine. Not only victims of emotional desolation, but also those who felt the presence of something strange and frightening in their lives began to seek her out. Each new case added a piece to the puzzle of understanding the creature's nature. Anna discovered that the entity wasn't alone. There were many such beings, each with its own peculiarities and preferences. Some fed only on children's fear. Others preferred the terror of the dying, and still others hunted people with specific mental disorders. Gradually, Anna developed a system of protection based on her observations. She taught people techniques of emotional control, methods of distraction during moments of peak fear, and ways to create protective barriers using strong, positive emotions. Some of her methods seemed strange, but they worked. People who followed her recommendations were less likely to become victims of emotional desolation, but with each passing day, Anna felt her own condition worsen. Contact with the creature had left an indelible mark on her psyche. She could no longer experience joy with the same intensity. Sadness became dull and lifeless, and fear turned into a constant background against which her life unfolded. She understood that she was slowly turning into the same hollow shell as her patients. Work became her only source of meaning. Anna spent days and nights studying new cases, developing protection methods, and helping people fight invisible predators. She knew that time was working against her, that each day brought her closer to complete emotional desolation. But she couldn't stop, couldn't leave people defenseless in the face of ancient evil. Her apartment transformed into a true research center. The walls were covered with diagrams, charts, and patient photographs. Shelves held devices for registering anomalous phenomena, and in the corners of the room lay various amulets and talismans that, as she discovered, could provide partial protection against the creatures. It all looked like a mix of a scientific laboratory and a medieval alchemist's dwelling. Anna kept a detailed diary, recording not only her research findings but also changes in her own condition. She wanted to document the process of emotional desolation from within, to understand the mechanisms of the creature's influence on the human psyche. These records could become valuable material for future researchers who might find more effective methods of combating invisible predators. Gradually, not only victims of the creatures, but also those who, like her, were trying to study the phenomenon began to seek her out. It turned out that in different countries, people had independently come to similar conclusions. They exchanged information, shared experiences, and together sought solutions to the problem. Anna realized that she was not alone in her struggle against ancient evil, but the more she learned about the creatures, the more hopeless the situation seemed. These beings had been a part of reality for millennia. They adapted to changes in human society, becoming more sophisticated in their hunting methods. Modern civilization, with its stresses, fears, and anxieties, created ideal conditions for their existence. Anna understood that her individual efforts were just a drop in the ocean. Systemic work was needed, a unification of efforts from scientists, doctors, and paranormal researchers. But official science was not ready to accept the existence of such entities, and alternative researchers often lacked the necessary knowledge and resources. She decided to create a secret organization that would unite people fighting invisible predators. Anna used her connections in the medical community, attracted researchers from different countries, and established a secure communication network for information exchange. The organization was named Guardians of Light, a symbolic designation for those who protect humanity from ancient darkness. The organization's work developed in several directions. Some participants focused on researching the creature's nature, others developed protection methods, and still others provided assistance to victims of emotional desolation. Anna coordinated these activities despite her own condition continuing to worsen. But the creatures did not remain passive. They somehow sensed the threat and began to hunt members of the organization more actively. One by one, the participants of the Guardians of Light became victims of emotional desolation, despite all precautions. Anna understood that the invisible predators were waging war against those who tried to uncover their secrets. The first casualty was Dmitry Kravtsov, a physicist from Novosibirsk who was developing electromagnetic methods for detecting the creatures. He was found in the Institute's laboratory, sitting in front of turned-off equipment with an empty gaze. All his research had been destroyed, and he himself had become an emotionless shell. Colleagues attributed it to nervous exhaustion from overwork, but Anna knew the true reason. The creatures had begun to deliberately eliminate those who could pose a threat to them. Next was Maria Voloshina, a psychologist from Kiev who worked with children victims of emotional desolation. She was found at home, in the children's room she had set up for working with young patients. Maria sat in a tiny armchair, surrounded by toys and drawings, but her face was deathly calm. Her parents said she hadn't left the room for several days, hadn't eaten or slept, just sat among the children's things like a statue. Anna understood that the creatures had studied their methods and learned to overcome protective barriers. They had become more aggressive, more targeted, as if they had received an order to destroy anyone who tried to investigate them. Every day brought news that another member of the organization had fallen victim to emotional desolation. The network of the Guardians of Light was shrinking like shagreen leather. In this environment, Anna decided on extreme measures. She realized that the only way to stop the creatures was to find their source, the place or state from which they emerged. Her research indicated that all entities had something in common. They seemed to be connected by an invisible thread, receiving commands from a single center. Perhaps there was a main entity coordinating the actions of the others. Anna began preparing for the most dangerous experiment of her life. She planned not just to summon the creature, but to try and trace its connection to its source, even if it cost her her life. She understood it was a suicidal mission, but there were no other options. The organization was crumbling. People continued to become victims, and official medicine still refused to acknowledge the problem. The preparation took several weeks. Anna transformed her apartment into a veritable fortress, installing powerful spotlights, white noise generators, and electromagnetic emitters. She studied all available materials on protection against supernatural entities, combining scientific methods with ancient rituals. Salt, silver, iron, holy water, all were placed around the perimeter of the apartment in accordance with traditional beliefs about protection from evil. But most importantly, Anna prepared herself for the possibility of not surviving. She wrote detailed instructions for whoever found her body, drew up a will requesting that her work be continued. All her research she copied onto multiple storage devices and sent to trusted people in various countries. Even if she perished, her knowledge had to remain and help others in the fight against invisible predators. In the evening, as darkness deepened outside, Anna began her final experiment. She turned off all protective systems, leaving only surveillance cameras and recording devices. Then she sat in the center of the room and began to summon the creature, using all her fear, all her pain, all the despair that had accumulated over months of research. The creature appeared almost instantly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. But this time it was different, more powerful, more real, more threatening. Anna realized that not an ordinary creature had come to her, but one of the main ones, perhaps even their leader. The entity filled the entire room. Its presence was overwhelming, stunning. The air became so cold that Anna's breath turned into clouds of vapor, but instead of immediately feeding on her fear, the creature stopped. Anna felt it studying her, trying to understand what she was. A voice sounded in her mind, not a voice in the usual sense, but a direct transmission of thoughts. The creature spoke in a language she didn't know, but somehow understood. It told her of its origin, that they were not parasites in the full sense of the word. These beings were part of a natural balance, purifiers of emotional space. They fed on negative emotions, preventing them from accumulating and poisoning the world. For millennia, they had existed in symbiosis with humanity, absorbing excess fear, rage, and despair. But something had changed in recent decades. Human civilization had begun to produce too many negative emotions. Wars, catastrophes, the stresses of modern life created an excess of food for the creatures. They began to multiply, to become more aggressive, to lose control over their actions. Instead of simply cleansing the emotional space, they began to destroy people's ability to feel altogether. Anna realized she was witnessing a tragedy of cosmic proportions. The ancient symbiosis had been disrupted, and the creatures had turned from helpers into predators. They themselves suffered from this transformation, but they could not stop. Their nature demanded sustenance, and the excess of food made them insane with hunger. The creature showed her visions of the past when people knew of the existence of such beings and lived with them in relative harmony. Shamans, priests, mystics, they all understood the need to maintain a balance between light and darkness, joy and fear. But modern civilization had lost this knowledge, and now it was paying a terrible price. Anna asked if there was a way to restore the lost balance. The creature replied that it was possible, but it would require sacrifices. Someone would have to become a link between the two worlds, voluntarily sacrificing themselves to restore the ancient pact. This person would have to give not only their life, but also their soul, becoming part of a network that would regulate the interaction between humans and the creatures. Anna understood that this offer was directed at her. She could save humanity from emotional desolation, but the price would be absolute. She would cease to exist as a separate individual, dissolve into the collective consciousness of the creatures, become an eternal guardian, controlling their appetites. The decision was not easy. Anna thought of her patients, of her colleagues in the organization, of the millions of people who could fall victim to emotional desolation. She thought of children who would grow up in a world devoid of true emotions, of humanity's future, which could turn into an army of emotionless robots. But she also thought of herself, of her dreams, of the life she could still live. She was only 37. Decades of research, discoveries, and helping people could still be ahead of her. She could find another way to fight the creatures, create a new theory, develop effective protection methods. But there was no time for that. Every day of delay meant new victims. Anna closed her eyes and made her choice. She agreed to become a bridge between worlds, sacrificing herself for the salvation of humanity. The creature accepted her decision with something akin to gratitude and sorrow simultaneously. It understood the price she was paying, and it pained it. The transformation process began slowly. Anna felt her consciousness expand, connecting with the network of creatures across the world. She saw them all, thousands of hungry beings feeding on human fear in different corners of the planet. Gradually, she began to understand their nature, their needs, their suffering. But with this understanding came pain. Anna felt every victim of emotional desolation, every person who lost the ability to feel. Their suffering became her suffering, their emptiness, her emptiness. She understood that this would continue forever, that she was doomed to endless torment for the sake of saving humanity. Anna's physical body began to change. She felt her flesh become less dense, the boundaries between her and the surrounding world blurring. Memories of her human life faded, replaced by a deeper, ancient knowledge. She remembered her name, her mission, but the personality of Dr. Anna Volkova slowly dissolved into the collective consciousness of the creatures. The last thing she did as a human was to record a message for whoever found her body. With trembling hands, she wrote in her diary about what had happened, about the sacrifice that had to be made, about the hope that balance would be restored. She asked that her death not be considered a tragedy but seen as a necessary link in the chain of humanity's salvation. When the transformation was complete, Anna's body was no more. She had become part of the invisible network that enveloped the entire world. Her consciousness distributed itself among thousands of creatures, becoming a voice of reason for them, controlling their appetites and guiding their actions. There was no more chaotic absorption of emotions. Now the creatures fed carefully, without causing irreversible harm to humans. The changes were almost immediately noticeable. The number of cases of emotional desolation sharply decreased. People still experienced fear, but it was no longer completely consumed. The creatures learned to take only what was necessary, leaving people with the ability to feel and experience. The ancient balance was restored, but at the cost of one person's life and soul. Colleagues from the Guardians of Light organization found Anna's apartment a week after her disappearance. They discovered the diary with her last entries, video recordings of the experiments, and data from the instruments that registered the moment of transformation. But Anna herself was gone. Only an empty armchair in the center of the room surrounded by inert devices. Her diary became a sacred text for those who continued to study the creatures. It contained not only scientific data but also philosophical reflections on the nature of good and evil, on the price one has to pay to save the world. Anna foresaw that her sacrifice might be misunderstood, that someone might consider her insane or heroic, but she hoped that people would understand the true meaning of her act. Professor Nikitin, who once disbelieved her theories, became one of the first to acknowledge the significance of her work. After studying her notes and comparing them with the sharp reduction in cases of emotional desolation, he understood that Anna had been right from the very beginning. He dedicated the rest of his career to studying her legacy, trying to understand the mechanisms she had discovered. But most importantly, people themselves changed. They became more aware of their emotions, more attentive to their fears and anxieties. It was as if Anna's death awakened a forgotten wisdom in humanity, reminding them of the need to maintain balance between light and darkness within their souls. The creatures were no longer invisible predators. They remained unseen by most people, but their presence was felt differently, not as a threat, but as part of the natural order of things. Sometimes, in moments of particularly strong fear, sensitive individuals could feel their presence, but it no longer led to emotional desolation. Anna became a legend, a myth, a symbol of self-sacrifice for the salvation of humanity. Her name was passed by word of mouth among those who knew the truth about the invisible creatures. She transformed into an eternal guardian who ensures that the ancient balance is never again disrupted. But her sacrifice was not only a victory, but also a tragedy. The world lost a brilliant scientist, a compassionate doctor, a person who could have made many more discoveries. Her personality dissolved into the collective consciousness, and what was once Dr. Anna Volkova now existed only as an echo in the network of invisible creatures. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the world fell asleep, those with special sensitivity could hear her voice. It sounded like a whisper of the wind, like a distant melody, like a reminder that somewhere in the invisible world, there is a force that protects humanity from ancient evil. Anna disappeared as a human but remained as an idea, as a symbol that love for people can be stronger than the fear of death. Her story became a warning for future generations. The world is full of invisible forces that can both help and harm humanity. It's important to remember the need to maintain balance, not to let negative emotions accumulate and poison the world. Anna's sacrifice reminds us that sometimes salvation comes through self-sacrifice, and true victory can look like defeat. Thus ended the story of Dr. Anna Volkova, the woman who discovered the existence of invisible predators that fed on human fear and sacrificed herself for the salvation of the world. Her body disappeared, but her spirit remained forever connected to the forces she studied. She became a bridge between worlds, an eternal guardian who ensures that the balance between light and darkness is never disrupted again. The tragedy of her story lies not only in her death, but also in the fact that the world never learned of her feat. Official medicine still doesn't recognize the existence of invisible creatures, and her discoveries remain the property of a narrow circle of initiates. Anna saved humanity, but humanity will never know the name of its savior. Her last entries end with the words, "I do not regret my choice. If my death helps even one person retain the ability to feel, if it protects children from emotional desolation, then I have not lived in vain." Remember, fear is not the enemy. It is part of our nature, but it should not consume us completely. Seek balance, cherish your emotions, and may my spirit help you in this. Thus concluded the tragic tale of the doctor who sacrificed herself to save humanity from invisible predators that fed on fear. Her death was not an end, but the beginning of a new stage in the relationship between humans and the ancient forces that exist beside us but remain invisible to most.